Hey everyone, it's John Literal here, and this is part 5 of the series that I'm doing on the history of the Illuminati. And so in this part, I'm actually going to go back and do a little backtracking and read part of the section that I read in the 4th part. And this will be completely on the section on Rockefeller's General Education Board. And I just want to go ahead and put this whole section all together. So let's go ahead and start. At the turn of the century, one of the most despised names on the American scene was that of Rockefeller. Old John D. Rockefeller had earned his reputation with unprecedented guile, deceit, and greed. His name was synonymous with ruthless exploitation. He often stated that, quote-unquote, competition is a sin. In an effort to change his image, but not his character, John D. Rockefeller hired Ivy Lee, one of the nation's leading ad men. At Lee's suggestion, Mr. Standard Oily carried a pocket full of dimes around with him and handed them to young children when he made his rare appearance in public. As part of his quote-unquote image improvement program, Rockefeller set up a series of foundations and trusts. Outwardly, these were presented to the public as an effort on Rockefeller's part to better the lot of American people by financing projects in education, medicine, and religion. But true to John D. Rockefeller's deeply conspiratorial nature, there was always a catch. As Gary Allen points out in his new bestseller, which was new at the time, the book called The Rockefeller File, Gary Allen says, quote, that he had an even more Machiavellian scheme in mind. He would, quote-unquote, give money away to foundations under his control and then have those foundations spend the money in ways which brought even more power and profits to the Rockefeller empire. The money, quote-unquote, given away would be bread cast upon the waters. The bread that almost always had a hook in it. John D. Rockefeller was to refer to this as the, quote, principle of scientific giving, end of quote. What a name. This fact was clearly demonstrated when it came to Rockefeller's relationship with education. John D. Rockefeller enrolled the aid of Fred Gates, who earlier had enjoyed immense success as a frontman for the Pillsbury Flour Company, to organize his General Education Board. The real purpose of this board was not, as some were led to believe at the time, to upgrade the standard of American education and so benefit the nation as a whole. Just like Clinton Roosevelt and Albert Pike before them, they showed their hand in the first publication. They followed a pattern laid out over 100 years earlier by Adam Weishaupt, who wrote that, quote, it is necessary to gain the common people to our order. The best means to that ends is influence in the schools, end of quote by Adam Weishaupt. It would be difficult to express more precisely the objectives of Weishaupt's conspiracy in the field of educational propaganda that was done in his occasional letter number 1 of Rockefeller's General Education Board in 1904. It states that, quote, in our dreams we have limitless resources and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions fade from their minds and unhampered by tradition. We work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people of any of their children into philosophers or men of learning, or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply of. He goes on to say, Rockefeller does, the task we set before ourselves is very simple as well as a very beautiful one. To train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. So we will organize our children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way, in the homes, in the shops, and on the farm. All the important elements, in a quote of that from Rockefeller, all the important elements of Weissel's Illuminism are found in his letter. First, we see the pose of quote-unquote philanthropy. Second, the intent to brainwash or mold the people. Third, the elimination of tradition, science, and real learning. Fourth, the dictatorship objective. Fifth, the intent to regiment the peasants in a caste system, just as they are. Sixth, the plan to reduce national intelligence to the lowest common denominator and to destroy parental influence and so break up the family. Seventh, total contempt for the peasants. Eighth, the element of subversion and un-Americanism, the declared intent to overthrow accepted customs to serve the purposes of the Rockefellers. And lastly, perfectibilitism, that is, the perfecting of human nature, which was also Weissel's fake aim. The corruptive influence that the Rockefeller foundations have had on the American school system is thoroughly documented. When a congressional committee headed by Carol Reese of Tennessee tried to hold an open investigation into the activities of the foundations, they ran into a solid wall of opposition from all the powers that be in the nation's capital, and it had to be disbanded. 4 years later, the committee's general counsel, Rene A. Wormser, wrote a very revealing book on the subject called Foundation, Their Power and Influence. He stated that the facts this committee developed leads one to the conclusion that there was indeed something in the nature of an actual conspiracy among certain leading educators in the United States to bring about socialism through the use of our school systems. It says, quote, a very powerful complex of foundations and applied organizations have developed over the years to exercise a high degree of control over education. Part of this complex, and ultimately responsible for it, are the Rockefeller and Carnegie groups of foundations, end quote. Rockefeller and his allies understood that in order to control the school system, they had to gain control of the teachers' colleges. This was accomplished over a period of years by making grants to the leading universities for the alleged purpose of helping them develop and grow. But true to Rockefeller's principle of scientific giving, there was a hook in every grant. Rockefeller fronts always ended up on boards of the institutions being quote-unquote helped. This gave them a big say in how things were run. Progressive, quote-unquote progressive, educator John Dewey was a leading figure in their overall plans. As head of the Teachers College at Columbia University, he became prominent and was later the most influential man in American education. In 1919, with Rockefeller money, he founded the Progressive Education Association to promulgate the ideas of his masters. As time went by, Dewey was joined by Ruggs, Counts, Kilpatrick, and other one-world socialists. They succeeded in worming their way into positions of authority and set out the use of the educational system as a tool to accomplish their political goals. In their writings and speeches, they made no effort to hide the fact that their main objective was to lead American nation like a flock of dumb, unsuspecting sheep. Boy, didn't they accomplish that. In a Pied Piper procession into a socialist one-world utopia where they would, like in every other fairy tale, live happily ever after. A few quotations should serve to prove this point. In 1933, Dr. Harold Ruggs, in his book called The Great Technology, revealed how they planned to bring America into a bondage of a socialist state. It says, quote, a new public mind to be created. How? Only by creating tens of millions of individual minds and welding them into a new social mind. Old stereotypes must be broken up and new climates of opinion formed in the neighborhoods of America. Through the schools of the world, we shall decimate a new conception of government, one that will embrace all the collective activities of men, one that will postulate the need of social control and operation of economic activities in the interest of all the people. End of quote. Dr. George Counts, a professor of education and leading member of Dewey's Frontier Thinkers, wrote that, quote, the teachers should reach for power and then make the most of their conquest. To the extent that they are allowed to fashion the curriculum and procedures of the school, they will definitely and positively influence the social attitudes, ideas, and behavior of the coming generation. End of quote. In the 1934 Report on Education, produced by the American Historical Association and sponsored by Carnegie Foundation, Counts wrote that, quote, the age of individualism and freedom is economy and government enclosing, and a new age of collectivism is emerging. End of quote. In an article in the New Republic in July 29th of 1936, the leading British socialist, Harold Laski, stated that, quote, stripped of its carefully neutral phrases, the report is an educational program for a socialist America. End of quote. Counts and his associates never denied this fact. They stated that to achieve their objective, basic changes in our ideas were needed. How are the changes in the ideas of a nation brought about? Simply by changing what is taught in the schools, colleges, and universities, in the churches, and in the mass media. To accomplish the former goal, the new authorities in education had most of the basic textbooks scrapped and rewritten to plug the new socialist line. Many textbooks made their appearance in classrooms, all specifically designed to undermine traditional values and to brainwash the students into the acceptance of socialism, in which Big Brother government would influence or control virtually every phase of people's lives. The battle was on for the minds of the nation's youth, and the socialists threw everything into that blitzkrieg-type assault. No holds were barred. Newspapers, magazines, radio stations, all of which had been infiltrated by leftists, took up the socialist cause, and the public was subjected to a subtle propaganda bombardment to further the creation of a new social mind. At first, there were loud protests from those alert enough to realize that something was drastically wrong. The progressive educators changed their tactics. Their attacks on the nation's heroes, customs, and heritage were changed from being open to being implied, and were thus much harder to detect by those who were not analyzing and weighing every word. From being nation-building institutions, foundational pillars is in a basically sound society, the school and college systems were transformed into what has rightly been termed, quote-unquote, incubators of degeneracy. You got that right. When we look at education, quote education, today we see a situation which is very encouraging, even inspiring, that is, to our enemies. The creators of a new social mind have done a thorough job. Take, for example, the inroads made by pornography in our society. What are the real motives of the intellectual pornophiles? They appear to be mixed. Some, no doubt, genuinely believe it should be available by right as a quote-unquote harmless ingredient of a free society. But there is little doubt that others are defending it as a tool to ultimately help destroy the free society that spawns it, and thus destroy the truly worthwhile values of that society. If they can use pornography to help erode and sap the strength of a society whose present structure they wish to see swept away, well and good. It is an ideal weapon to use to weaken Western civilization, to undermine the foundations of our society, and thus pave the way for a new, presumably Marxist society. Why is it that millions of upright, law-abiding citizens who do not go along with this boon in pornography they just sit back and do nothing while our once stable society is being mauled by the media to the applause of the ignoramuses of the intellectual fringe and the conspirators of the far left? One has only to listen to the average man or woman in the street, or question their beliefs or lack of them, to understand the reason, and to realize the stunning and frightening success of the conspiracy's onslaught through the schools and other media. Mostly, their reasoning processes have been so warped and bent out of shape by having liberal propaganda pumped into their plastic, unsuspecting minds from the earliest consciousness that they have no real foundation on which to base decisions relating to real life. They have not been trained to face up to the real life situations, life as it really is. The educational process has taught them to earn a living, but it has never taught them how to live. There is a vast difference. Admiral Hyman Rickover summed up the situation well when he said, quote, "America is reaping the consequences of the destruction of traditional education by the Dewey-Kilpatrick experimental philosophy. Dewey's ideas have led to the elimination of many academic subjects on the ground that they would not be useful in life. The student thus receives neither intellectual training nor the factual knowledge which will help them understand the world he lives in, or to make well-rounded decisions in his private life or as a responsible citizen." The awful truth of the Admiral's words should be startlingly evident when we look closely at society like it really is. The aims expressed in Rockefeller's occasional letter number 1 are being fulfilled. And so I'll end this part 5 right here. I'll put a link to the book that I'm reading from by Des Griffin called The Fourth Reich of the Rich. Take care and have a good day.